Chapter 16. The legend of Siegmund the monster's arm hung from the rafters. The Danes praised the hero's overwhelming strength. Morning broke, and the feast hall buzzed with a mob of hardened warriors. Warlords and chieftains rode from all corners of the earth, pushing across wide dirt roads just to lay eyes on the grisly trophy, Grendel's severed, bleeding claw. Nobody shed a single tear for the butchered beast. Instead, they tracked the carnage. They eagerly followed the gory trail, where the broken monster had dragged its mangled carcass all the way back to the demon-infested lake to die. The lake was boiling with blood. Vile, crimson waves surged and churned with hot gore. Grendel had plunged into this swampy hell pit to hide, completely stripped of his savage joy. He bled out in the murky depths, coughing up his heathen soul as the underworld swallowed him whole. The warriors didn't linger in the gloom. They spurred their white war steeds and galloped back in triumph. Their voices echoed through the valleys, chanting Beowulf's name. They swore up and down that under the vast stretch of the sky, north or south, no warrior walked the earth who was deadlier, braver, or more fit to wear a crown than Beowulf. They meant no disrespect to their own king, of course. Hrothgar was a fine ruler and they loved him, but Beowulf was a living god of war. As they tore down the open paths, racing their brown horses in the dust, an old poet rode among them. This king's thane was a master of the ancient sagas, a man who carried 1,000 blood-soaked legends in his mind. Inspired by the morning's glory, he forged new verses on the spot. He spun a raw, brilliant tale of Beowulf's brutal victory, capturing the sheer savagery of the night before. Then, the bard shifted his tune. He roared out the epic saga of Siegmund, the mighty son of Wales. He sang of Siegmund's ruthless crusades, his brutal blood feuds and secrets so dark that only his loyal nephew Fitla knew them. The two were a terrifying storm on the battlefield. Side by side, they had carved a bloody path through hordes of giants, butchering them with heavy broadswords. But Siegmund's greatest kill, the one that cemented his immortal legacy, happened alone. Deep in a gray stone cavern, he had stalked a colossal dragon hoarding a massive mountain of gold. Without Fitla to back him up, Siegmund faced the winged nightmare solo. He didn't flinch. He lunged in and drove his greatsword straight through the beast's scaly hide, pinning the screeching monster against the cavern wall. The dragon died, choking on its own fire. Siegmund ripped the treasure from the beast's dead claws, loading a ship to the brim with gold and glowing jewels. Behind him, the dragon's ruined carcass literally melted into a puddle of foul slime, consumed by its own infernal heat. Now, Beowulf stood on that exact same pedestal, a dragon slayer's equal, a legend forged in blood. Chapter 17. The kings praise footprints leading to the bloody swamp, confirming the miserable end of the beast that fled to hell. Siegmund claimed the title of the world's most famous adventurer. His violent, glorious deeds cemented his early legend. But ancient King Hermod, his power rotted, his courage crumbled. Betrayed to his enemies in the land of the Jutes, Hermod met a swift and brutal end. Crippled by his own sorrow, Hermod had devolved into a deadly curse upon his own people. His nobles watched him fall. The wise men mourned the king he used to be, praying he would finally rise and defend their gold and their homeland. He never did. Sin and greed devoured Hermod's heart, but Beowulf, the fierce nephew of Hygelac, forged a different path, earning the roaring love of his friends and the awe of mankind. Outside, warriors raced their war horses down the dirt roads, kicking up dust in the blinding morning sun. A massive crowd of battle-hardened men surged toward the great hall. They craved a glimpse of the prize, the severed, bloody claw of the monster. King Hrothgar, the scarred guardian of the kingdom's hoard, marched from the royal chambers flanked by a heavy troop of loyal nobles. Queen Wealhtheow strode fiercely at his side, a company of maidens at her back, heading straight for the feast hall. Hrothgar ascended the hall's steps. He planted his boots firmly, staring up at the gleaming golden roof, then down at the grotesque ruin of Grendel's arm. His voice boomed out over the crowd.
Thank the Almighty for this bloody prize. Grendel dragged us through hell. He drowned us in suffering. But the Guardian of Glory still forges miracles.
Hrothgar roared.
I nearly gave up. I watched this beautiful hall get painted with our own blood. Even our wisest counselors broke down, convinced we could never defend our home from these nightmare demons.
Hrothgar turned his blazing eyes to the crowd.
But now, by the power of the Lord, one young warrior has smashed through where all our clever plans failed. If the mother who bore this titan still breathes, she knows God smiled upon her.
He pointed straight at the hero.
Beowulf, best of men, from this day forward I claim you as my own son. Guard this bond with your life. Ask for anything in my power, and it is yours.
Hrothgar threw his arms wide.
I have dumped chests of treasure on lesser men who couldn't fight half as well as you. But you carved your own glory into eternity. May the Almighty reward your fury today and forever.
Chapter 18. The spoils of carnage, the festival of victory, the songs of great heroes heat up the golden hall. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, stood tall and grinned.
We threw down with the beast and loved every second of it. We stared that nightmare right in the eyes. I just wish you could have seen Grendel yourself, choking on his own blood, broken and dying.
He raised a scarred fist.
I meant to slam him into a deathbed right here on the floor. I locked my grip to crush the life out of him, but the bastard slipped my hold. The Almighty didn't want him to die in this hall, and the fiend bolted before I could snap his spine.
Beowulf gestured to the bloody trophy hanging from the rafters.
But he left his hand, arm, and shoulder to buy his pathetic retreat. Not that it'll save him. That miserable freak is already a walking corpse. Agony has him by the throat, chained in a death grip he can't break. Now he's crawling in the dark, waiting for God to throw him into the abyss.
Unferth, son of Ecglaf, suddenly had nothing to say. The loudmouth's boasts dried up completely. The nobles crowded in, staring up at the high roof. They gaped at the severed arm Beowulf had ripped from the monster. Grendel's fingers ended in brutal, steel-hard talons. Those monstrous spikes were designed to shred flesh and bone. Every warrior in the room knew the truth. No sword on earth, no matter how ancient or sharp, could have hacked through that unholy hide. Only raw, God-given strength had done the job. With the beast defeated, orders flew out to restore Hrothgar. Men and women swarmed the great hall, scrubbing away the gore. They hung brilliant, gold-woven tapestries across the blood-stained walls, turning a slaughterhouse back into a palace. The sheer violence of the brawl had nearly wrecked the building. Iron-forged beams were twisted, and the massive door hinges were completely shredded. Only the roof had survived intact when the demonic outlaw violently broke out and ran for his life. But death is a hunter you cannot outrun. Every soul on earth must face the grave when the feast of life finally ends. Soon, Hrothgar strode into the great hall. The king of the Danes had come to celebrate. Never had a more savage and loyal band of warriors gathered around their warlord. The legendary heroes claimed their benches and tore into the feast. Hrothgar and his fierce nephew, Hrothulf, slammed their cups together, draining rivers of mead in the high hall. Hrothgar roared with the laughter of brothers in arms. For now, the Danes stood united, their blades sharp and their hearts completely free of betrayal. Chapter 19. The Great Feast and the Story of Finn. Massive treasures bestowed by the king, golden comfort for the warriors who shed blood. Hrothgar didn't hold back. To honor the slaughter of Grendel, the king bestowed Beowulf with a glittering golden banner, a master-crafted helmet, a heavy mail shirt, and a legendary sword. The hall erupted in cheers as the spoils were marched before the monster slayer. Beowulf drained his mead cup, unashamed to claim his due. These weren't just gifts, they were a warlord's tribute. The helmet bore a reinforced iron ridge, coiled with wire, armor forged to shatter enemy blades before they could crack a warrior's skull. But Hrothgar wasn't finished. The king commanded 8 war horses, champing at the bit in gold-plated bridles, to be marched right onto the mead hall floor. One beast bore a saddle encrusted with gems and intricate metalwork. It was Hrothgar's personal war saddle, the very seat from which the legendary king had directed the slaughter of his enemies, never flinching as men were hacked to pieces around him.
Take them.
Hrothgar declared, handing Beowulf the reins and the steel.
Ride them into glory.
With open hands, the Danish king paid the blood price for Grendel's defeat. He showered Beowulf with stallions and steel, a kingly reward so staggeringly generous that no man could ever speak a word against it. Chapter 20. The story of Finn, Hengist, and Hildiba, a tragedy within the song, an epic of bloody revenge adds fuel to the feast. King Hrothgar wasn't done yet. He unloaded a mountain of priceless treasure onto every single warrior who had braved the churning seas with Beowulf. For the Geatish fighter Grendel had torn apart, Hrothgar paid out in blood gold. The hell beast would have slaughtered them all if God's iron will and Beowulf's raw, savage grit hadn't stood in its path. The Almighty commanded the battlefield then, just as he commands it now. Sharp wits and looking ahead keep a man alive, because if you breathe long enough in this war-torn world, you'll taste both the sweetest glory and the bitterest ash. Music roared through the great hall. The king's poet plucked the wooden harp and launched into an epic saga, his booming voice echoing over the mead benches, thrilling the drunken warriors. He sang the blood-soaked tragedy of King Finn's sons. Echnif, the fierce Danish warlord, was doomed to bleed out in a brutal clash against the Frisians. Queen Hildiba, Echnif's own sister, shackled in marriage to Finn, learned the hard way that Frisian loyalty was a hollow joke. Completely blameless, she watched her world shatter. Both her son and her brother took spears to the gut, dropping dead on the chaotic battlefield. Her grief was absolute. When the morning sun broke, Hildiba, daughter of Hawk, collapsed in tears. Under a cold, open sky, the mangled corpses of her kin lay rotting exactly where her greatest joy used to reside. The slaughter left Finn's warband gutted. Most of his elite fighters were dead in the mud. Overwhelmed and outmatched, he couldn't push back against Hengist, the furious new Danish commander. He couldn't even keep his surviving men breathing against the Danish onslaught. Backed into a corner, King Finn sued for peace. He offered Hengist a desperate truce. The Frisians would clear out a brand new mead hall and carve out a fresh throne, splitting power right down the middle. Furthermore, whenever Finn cracked open the armory to pass out the spoils, he swore to shower the Danes in gold and jewels, matching every single coin he handed his own Frisian warriors in the beer hall. Chapter 21. Queen Wealhtheow's plea for her sons, the queen's desperate prayer, raising the golden cup in hopes of eternal peace. A bitter peace was struck. King Finn swore blood oaths to Hengist. He would rule the surviving Danes with an even hand. No man by word or blade could shatter the truce. The Danes swallowed their fury. Fate had bound them to serve the man who slaughtered their king. But Finn laid down the law. If any Frisian dared mock the Danes for their defeat, the sword would do the talking. They built the pyre. Gold was dragged from the hoard. Echnif, the greatest of Danish warlords, was hauled onto the timber. Beside him lay shattered armor, gold-bore helmets, and a mountain of dead nobles. Queen Hildiba stood by the wood, shattered by grief. She ordered her own son cast into the flames beside his slaughtered uncle. She wept, screaming her sorrow into the wind as the torches were thrown. The pyre roared to life. A massive pillar of fire clawed at the clouds. Flesh burned, wounds split open, and boiling blood sizzled against the heat. The inferno devoured the fallen of both nations. Their glory turned to ash. Winter fell like an iron cage. The surviving warriors scattered, but a grim destiny chained Hengist to Finn's court. He craved the sea and his homeland, but ice locked the waves and brutal storms battered the coast. Then came spring, shattering the ice and bringing bright skies. But Hengist had no thoughts of home. He wanted blood. He wanted revenge on the Frisians. The waiting ended when a warrior dropped a legendary battle sword into Hengist's lap. The steel hummed for violence. Hengist took the blade. He embraced the slaughter. War exploded inside Finn's stronghold. The Danish warlords Guthlaf and Aslaf burst in from the sea. They were done choking on their fury. They unleashed absolute carnage. Finn's hall was painted with Frisian blood. King Finn was butchered among his own guards. The Danes looted his hoard, stripped his jewels, and dragged Queen Hildiba to their ships, sailing her back to her people. The poet's song ended. The hall erupted in cheers. Benches rattled, wine flowed, and the feast roared back to life. Queen Wealhtheow stepped into the light, wearing a crown of beaten gold. She strode to where King Hrothgar sat beside his nephew Hrothgar. For now, their loyalty was unbroken. At the king's feet sat Unferth. Everyone still respected his nerve, even though he was known for slaughtering his own kin in a past feud. The queen raised her cup.
Take this, my king, drink, speak to the Geats with the thunder of a true leader. Shower them in gifts, for your kingdom is secure.
Her eyes flashed.
I hear you wish to take Beowulf as your son. Hrothgar is purged. Revel in your wealth, but remember your bloodline. When death comes for you, leave this kingdom to your true family.
She stared hard at Hrothgar.
I know our nephew Hrothgar. If you fall before he does, he will lead our warriors with honor. He will remember the love we showed him and shield our sons.
With that, she walked to the prince's bench. There sat her boys, Hrothgar and Hrothmund, and seated right beside them was the ultimate weapon himself, Beowulf. Chapter 22. The golden collar and the sleepers, the glory of the golden necklace. The careless warriors fall asleep unaware of impending death. They brought the ceremonial cup to Beowulf, showering the slayer with praise. Hrothgar heaped the spoils of victory upon him, coils of twisted gold, heavy armbands, a flawless mail shirt, and thick rings. But the centerpiece was a massive golden collar, the largest ever forged on earth. Nothing matched its glory since the legendary hero Hama tore the brozing necklace from the hoard, escaping the wicked King Eärmenric and hauling the prize back to his shining city. Years later, King Hygelac of the Geats would wear that exact collar into his final bloody war. Driven by pride, he sparked a savage feud with the Frisians. Fate caught him. He died under his banner, defending his plunder. The mighty lord fell beneath his splintered shield, his life, his armor, and that legendary collar ripped away by enemy hands. Vultures and lesser men looted the dead, leaving Geatish warriors to rot on the battlefield. Back in Hrothgar, the mead hall roared with applause. Queen Wealhtheow stepped before the battle-hardened crowd.
Wear this ring and forge your own luck, Beowulf.
She proclaimed.
Wrap yourself in this mail shirt from our royal vault. Claim your glory, unleash your brute strength, and guide my young sons with a steady hand. I won't forget to reward you.
The warriors cheered.
You've cemented your legacy.
Wealhtheow continued, her voice echoing over the noise.
Men will sing your praises from the furthest shores to the storm-battered cliffs. Live long, fight hard, and prosper. I gladly hand over this wealth. Just watch over my boys. You've dragged Hrothgar back into the light. Look around, every warrior here is loyal to the bone, bound by blood and sworn to the king. We are a united front.
With that, she swept back to her throne. The feast hit a fever pitch. Wine flowed like rivers. Laughter shook the rafters. The men drank deeply, utterly blind to the grim slaughter waiting in the dark. When the sun finally died and Hrothgar retired to his chambers, a massive company of warriors locked down the hall. Just as in the old days, they shoved aside the heavy wooden benches and covered the floor with beds and bolsters. One warrior, marked for death, closed his eyes for the last time. The men stacked their wooden shields at their heads. Above each fighter on the massive benches sat their gear, dented helmets, heavy chain mail, and lethal iron-tipped spears. They didn't just sleep, they waited. Whether safe at home or neck-deep in enemy territory, they were always primed for war. If their king called, they answered with steel. They were true warriors to the end. Chapter 23. The revenge of Grendel's mother, a blood-soaked revenge. The swamp hag who lost her son opens another night of slaughter. The Danish warriors crashed in Hrothgar. They thought the nightmare was over. They were dead wrong. One of them was about to pay the ultimate price for a good night's sleep. For years, Grendel had slaughtered at will, bringing nothing but blood and misery to the hall until Beowulf shattered him. But out in the black waters of the moors, an avenger was already plotting. Grendel was dead, but his mother wasn't, and she was boiling with grief and rage. This monstrous hag festered in the frozen streams and black lakes, carrying the ancient curse of Cain. When the first murderer fled mankind's joy into the wasteland, he spawned a vile brood of demons, Grendel among them. But Grendel had crossed Beowulf. The demon thought he was hunting prey, but Beowulf was waiting in the dark. Armed with bone-crushing strength and absolute faith, Beowulf tore the beast apart and sent him crawling back to the swamp to die. Now, the Helldam wanted blood. She exploded into Hrothgar while the Danes slept completely unaware of the approaching slaughter. Her ambush sparked pure chaos. She might not have possessed the sheer, world-breaking strength of her son, but make no mistake, she was a lethal predator. Warriors jolted awake in a blind panic. Swords ripped from scabbards, and men snatched their heavy shields. Nobody had a second to strap on armor or secure a helmet. The terror struck too fast. The moment she realized the hall was waking up, the monster decided to bail. But she wasn't leaving empty-handed. She lunged, burying her claws into one of the nobles, hoisted him up like a rag doll, and bolted for the moors. Her victim wasn't just some random guard. He was King Hrothgar's most trusted advisor and dearest friend, slaughtered in his sleep. Where was Beowulf? The mighty Geat wasn't there. After the feast, they had set him up in private quarters across the compound. Cries of horror echoed through Hrothgar as the surviving Danes realized the full scope of the devastation. Grendel's mother had not only murdered their brother-in-arms, but she had also ripped her son's severed, bloody arm down from the rafters. The nightmare was back, a bloody exchange of lives. King Hrothgar was utterly shattered when he got the news. The old king demanded Beowulf be summoned immediately. At the crack of dawn, the champion marched into the royal chambers, his heavy boots shaking the wooden floorboards. Oblivious to the nighttime slaughter, Beowulf offered a cheerful greeting.
My lord,
Beowulf hailed.
did you rest well?
Little did he know, rest was the last thing the king of the Danes had found that night. Chapter 24. The death of Aesir and the swamp of monsters, the death of a favored comrade, the grief-stricken old king urgently summons the Geat hero. Hrothgar's voice was grim.
Don't ask me of joy. Sorrow has clawed its way back into our lands. Aesir is dead.
The king's eyes burned with grief.
He was my most trusted counselor. My brother in arms, we bled together on the battlefield, standing shoulder to shoulder while helmets shattered and swords broke around us. Aesir was everything a warrior should be.
Hrothgar clenched his fists.
A restless, murderous horror slaughtered him right here in Hrothgar. She dragged his corpse away, bloated with pride, off to feast in the dark. She came to settle the score for yesterday when you crushed Grendel's life out with your bare hands.
He paced the hall.
For years, Grendel butchered my people and bled my kingdom dry. You ended him. But now, another mighty abomination rises to avenge her son. Her vengeance cuts deep. The loyal hand that showered us with gifts and struck down our enemies now lies cold.
The king turned back to Beowulf.
My scouts speak of two giant stalkers haunting the moors, one twisted into the shape of a woman, the other an outcast in the form of a man, only far more monstrous. The people called him Grendel. Who sired him, or what hellish spirits spawned before him, no one knows.
Hrothgar's tone grew darker.
They fester in a desolate wasteland of wolf-haunted ridges and razor-sharp cliffs. Out there, a mountain stream plunges beneath the jagged rock, vanishing deep underground. The lake lies just a few miles away. Frozen, gnarl-rooted trees loom over the water, and every night the surface erupts in unnatural fire. No man alive knows its true depth.
He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper.
Even a hunted stag, desperate and chased by hounds, will let the dogs tear its throat out on the bank rather than dive into that cursed water. It is a place of absolute dread. When storms strike, black waves surge to the clouds, choking the sky until the heavens weep.
Hrothgar locked eyes with the Geatish champion.
Once again, everything rests on you. You don't know this killing ground, nor the nightmare lair where this creature hides. Seek it if you dare. Break her, and I will drown you in ancient treasure and twisted gold, just as I did before.
Chapter 25. Beowulf's blood oath. Hrothgar in despair, revealing the horrific and bizarre secrets of the cursed swamp. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, locked eyes with the broken king.
Stop your weeping, wise king.
His voice boomed.
It's better for a man to avenge his brother than to waste time mourning. Every single one of us is walking toward death. The only thing that matters is the blood we spill and the glory we steal before the end. That's the only true legacy for a warrior. On your feet, guardian of the realm, let's hunt this hag down. I swear this oath to you, Grendel's mother will find no safe harbor, not in the bowels of the earth, not in the blackest forest, and not at the bottom of the abyssal sea. She can run, but she cannot hide. Give me your patience today, and I will give you her head.
The old king surged to his feet, thanking the Almighty for the hero's iron will. Hrothgar bellowed for his warhorse. The beast was saddled, and the wise king rode out in state, a wall of hardened shield-bearers flanking him. The monster's tracks were everywhere, carved deep into the forest mud. The trail of death led straight into the suffocating gloom of the swamp. She had dragged Hrothgar's finest champion into the dark. The war party scaled jagged rock faces and treacherous, narrow ridges where monsters made their lairs. Beowulf pushed ahead, leading the scouts. Suddenly, the trees twisted into gnarled, lifeless claws hanging over gray stone. Below them, a festering lake of blood-red water boiled. The Danes choked on a collective gasp. There, mounted on the cliff overlooking the churning lake, was the severed head of Aesir. The water frothed with gore. The war horn shattered the silence, screaming a bloody battle anthem. The warriors lined the banks. The lake was swarming. Massive serpents and grotesque sea dragons writhed in the bloody deep. Hideous water abominations basked on the cliff ledges, the same horrors that ripped sailors apart on the open seas. At the blast of the horn, the beasts scrambled in fury. Beowulf didn't hesitate. He drew his bow and unleashed a shaft. The arrow slammed through the scales of a swimming monster, piercing its black heart. The beast thrashed, death seizing it instantly. The warriors roared, sinking barbed boar spears into the dead monster and hauling its massive, scaly carcass onto the shore. They stared at the grisly trophy. Beowulf began strapping on his war gear, entirely unbothered by the horror before him. His broad, hand-forged chainmail was a fortress of steel, forged to repel any demonic claws waiting in the deep. A blazing gold helmet, crowned with war-boar crests, was strapped to his head. A master smith of the ancient world had hammered it into shape, ensuring no mortal or immortal blade could ever breach it. Then came a surprise. Unferth, Hrothgar's arrogant loudmouth, stepped forward with an offering. He handed Beowulf Hrunting, a legendary ancient sword. The iron blade was etched with venomous runes, quenched in the blood of endless wars. It had never failed a warrior brave enough to wield it in the crucible of battle. Unferth, suddenly forgetting his old boasts, surrendered the weapon to a better man. Hrunting was ready for war. Chapter 26. The giant sword and the swim to the cave, the entrance to the terrifying swamp. The hero vows bloody revenge and dives into the crimson water. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, turned to the king.
Remember our pact, Hrothgar. I plunge into hell now. If I don't crawl back, protect my men, treat my young wolves as your own.
He pointed to his hoard.
Send that gold back to Hygelac. Let my king see the spoils I bled for. Let him know I served a generous lord. As for Unferth, let that loudmouth have my old family sword. I will carve out glory with Hrunting, or death can take me.
He didn't wait for an answer. The Jedish warlord dove straight into the abyss. The black, boiling lake swallowed him whole. Down he plunged through the crushing dark. It felt like an eternity before his boots hit the muddy bottom. The swamp hag had haunted this watery grave for 50 years. She sensed the intruder immediately. Lunging upward, she snatched the hero in her foul, crushing grip. But she couldn't tear his flesh. His battle-hardened chain mail held firm, grinding against her filthy claws. The sea-wolf dragged Beowulf deeper into her submerged lair. She pinned his arms so tight he couldn't swing his blade. Blood-crazed water beasts swarmed them in the depths, smashing their tusks against his armor in a tearing frenzy. Suddenly, the crushing water broke. Beowulf found himself slammed onto dry stone. He was inside a massive, domed cavern, sealed off from the lake's killing currents. A roaring fire burned in the center, illuminating the nightmare. There she stood, the monstrous swamp hag. Beowulf roared and swung Hrunting with all his brutal strength. The heavy steel cracked down on her skull like a thunderbolt. Clang! The legendary blade bounced right off. The edge completely failed. A sword that had sheared through 1,000 helmets and spilled an ocean of blood had just met its match. For the first time in its bloody history, it didn't leave a scratch. Beowulf didn't panic. He just got angrier. The warlord hurled the useless, jeweled sword against the cavern wall. Steel wouldn't end this. He'd rip her apart with his bare hands. This is the way of a true warrior. If you want immortal glory, you fight like you're already dead. Boiling with rage, Beowulf launched himself at Grendel's mother. He grabbed the screaming hag by the shoulder and hurled her violently to the stone floor. It was time to end it. Chapter 27. The underwater battle and the melted blade, a horrific underwater bloodbath with the hag. Even the trusted legendary sword betrays him against her tough hide. The she-wolf struck back with vicious speed, clamping Beowulf in a bone-crushing grip. Exhausted and battered, the strongest warrior on earth staggered and fell. The monster straddled him instantly. She whipped out a broad, razor-sharp hunting knife, her eyes burning with vengeance for her butchered son. She drove the blade down hard, but Beowulf's chain mail held. The forged rings bit into his shoulder, deflecting the lethal strike. If that armor had snapped, the great hero would have bled out deep beneath the earth. But God and good steel watched over him. With a roar of defiance, Beowulf surged to his feet, turning the tide of the fight. Then he saw it. Hanging among the rusted trophies on the cave wall was a weapon of myth. A massive, ancient sword forged by giants in the world's dawn. Its edge gleamed with impossible sharpness. It was the absolute pinnacle of weaponry, so heavy that no ordinary man could even lift it. Beowulf wasn't ordinary. Grim and furious, he wrapped his hands around the ornate hilt. He ripped the colossal blade from the wall. Channeling every ounce of his wrath, he swung the giant sword in a devastating arc. The edge sheared straight through her neck. Bone shattered. Muscle tore. The blade cleaved her doomed body completely in two. She crashed to the cavern floor in a heap of gore. The giant sword dripped with steaming blood. Beowulf smiled. The work was good. Suddenly the grim cavern flared with brilliant light, as blazing and pure as the midday sun. Gripping the giant hilt, Beowulf stalked along the cave wall, hunting for a final piece of payback. He hadn't forgotten the slaughter. He remembered Grendel ripping Hrothgar's sleeping men to shreds, swallowing 15 warriors whole and dragging 15 more back to this hellhole as meat. The fierce champion found what he was looking for. Grendel's massive corpse lay slumped in a corner, drained of life from the arm-rending wound he took at Hrothgar. Even in death, the brute needed a lesson. Beowulf brought the giant sword down in one colossal stroke. The headless corpse violently twitched as the blade sheared through its spine. Grendel's hideous head hit the floor. The job was finally done. Chapter 28. The return to the surface. With Grendel's head, the giant's sword, on the wall, the hero squeezes out all his strength and strikes like lightning upon the witch's head. Up on the cliff, King Hrothgar and his wise Danes watched the churning lake. Blood welled up, staining the black waves crimson. The gray-haired elders whispered their worst fears. They were sure the hero wouldn't return. To them, the monster of the deep had clearly won. By afternoon, the Danes abandoned their post. Hrothgar trudged home, his heart heavy with grief. But Beowulf's Geats stayed. Sick with dread, they sat by the water's edge and stared into the bloody depths. They prayed to see their warlord again, though hope slipped through their fingers. Deep beneath the surface, a miracle unfolded. The giant forged sword, drenched in toxic blood, began to melt. It dissolved into bloody icicles, vanishing like winter frost under the warm breath of spring. God, the true creator, had shattered the cold magic. Surrounded by untold riches, Beowulf ignored the gold. He wanted only two things: the glittering hilt of the melted sword and Grendel's massive severed head. The steel blade was gone, eaten away by the hag's boiling, venomous blood. With the monsters dead, the vast depths were finally cleansed. Beowulf kicked upward, swimming through the purified waters with his grisly prize. The Geatish warlord broke the surface and dragged himself ashore. He grinned, hefting his massive, bloody burden. His men rushed the shoreline, shouting prayers of thanks. They stripped off his heavy helmet and battle-scarred mail, marveling at his survival. Behind them, the bloody lake lay dead and calm. They marched for Hrothgar, roaring with victory. The burden was immense. It took 4 massive warriors to hoist Grendel's monstrous head on a spear shaft, but they moved with purpose. Soon, the 14 Geats hit the plains, with Beowulf striding at their front, a god of war returning to the mead hall. Chapter 29. The presentation of the trophies, blood signaling victory. Only the hilt of the giant's sword survives the boiling toxic blood. Beowulf strode into Hrothgar, blood-spattered and victorious. The legendary warrior approached Hrothgar's throne as his men dragged their prize across the feast hall floor. They hauled Grendel's severed head by its matted hair, dropping it right where the warriors drank. The queen gasped. The hardened soldiers stared in pure awe at the grisly, monstrous trophy. Beowulf stood tall and spoke out.
Look upon this, King Hrothgar. We ripped these spoils from the depths of the lake to prove our victory. It was a bloodbath down in that underwater hell. If the Almighty hadn't shielded me, they would have butchered me on the spot.
He gestured to the weapons.
Unferth's sword, Hrunting, couldn't pierce her hide, good blade as it is, but the Lord of Men guided my eyes. I saw a massive, ancient sword hanging on the cavern wall. God favors the fearless when all else fails. I tore the giant weapon from the stone and slaughtered the beast in her own lair.
Beowulf declared, his voice echoing through the silent hall.
When her boiling, toxic blood erupted, it melted the blade into nothing but slag. But I brought the hilt back from the demons. I have avenged the slaughtered Danes. The debt is paid in blood.
He locked eyes with the king.
I swear it, you and your warriors, young and old, can finally sleep in peace. Hrothgar is safe. The shadow of death is gone.
With a powerful thrust, Beowulf presented the golden hilt, forged by ancient giants, to the weary king. With the monsters eradicated, the relic belonged to Hrothgar, the greatest treasure giver in the north. Hrothgar took the hilt, tracing his fingers over the ancient gold. Carved into the metal was a legendary story, the great flood that drowned the ancient, rebellious giants. The Creator had unleashed the raging waters to wipe the enemies of the eternal Lord from the earth. And along the golden crossguard, glowing rune letters spelled out the name of the first warrior who had ever wielded the magnificent serpentine sword. Chapter 30. Hrothgar's sermon on pride. The Danes leave without hope, but the Geat warriors stand their ground, firmly believing in their hero's return. The old King Hrothgar rose. The feast hall instantly plunged into absolute silence.
Any leader who rules with an iron fist of truth and justice, guarding his realm and honoring the blood of the past, can look at you and see a true hero.
Hrothgar bellowed.
Your fame burns across the world, Beowulf. You wield immense power, yet your mind is just as sharp. Our pact stands strong. You will be a fortress for your people.
He paused, his voice turning grim.
King Hermod was not like you. He didn't bring victory to the Danes. He brought slaughter. Driven by blind rage, he butchered his own brothers in arms. The great prince isolated himself in a fortress of his own madness.
Hrothgar's eyes locked onto Beowulf.
God forged him stronger than any mortal, yet Hermod let his heart turn to poison. He hoarded his gold, denied his warriors their rightful spoils, and died a miserable, cursed wreck. Learn from his ruin, Beowulf. Let this old warrior's scars be your guide.
The king swept his gaze across the hall.
It is a terrifying wonder how God hands out power, land, and wisdom. He commands everything. He lets a king feast on victory, gifting him impenetrable fortresses and endless borders. Drunk on invincibility, the king forgets that death comes for us all. He lives untouchable, no sickness, no aging, no war. The world bows to him. But then pride takes root like a parasite. His conscience falls into a dead sleep. And when the watchman sleeps, the enemy strikes. A poisoned arrow pierces the king's black heart.
Hrothgar leaned forward.
Suddenly, his vast empire isn't enough. Greed claws at his soul. He locks away his gold, starving his loyal warriors of their rings, forgetting that his glory was a gift from above. But the end always comes.
Hrothgar warned.
The king rots and dies. A new ruler steps over his corpse and throws open the treasure vaults, rewarding the bold without an ounce of fear or greed. Crush that pride, Beowulf. You are the greatest of men. Choose the eternal path. Do not let arrogance master you.
The old king's voice echoed like thunder.
Right now your strength is absolute. But mark my words, sickness or a savage blade will strip it away. Fire, flood, a flying spear, or the crippling grip of old age will tear you down. The fire in your eyes will burn out. In the end, death conquers everyone, even you.